Welcome back to the Food on Demand podcast once again, where we dish up insights on the future of food relating to off-premises operations and the overall digital dining experience. I'm Bernadette Heyer, managing editor.
And I am Adam Wahlberg, Associate Editor. Quick reminder, if you haven't yet, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. We'd love to have you.
Yes, please do, and subscribe. Also, as I mentioned in the past episodes, registration is open for our Food on Demand conference, May 5th through 7th at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. And be sure to secure your spot early and don't miss the 3 days of editorial-driven panels we have prepared for you guys. We're working on the agenda now with some of that being released here soon. It's a great opportunity, as mentioned, to learn everything you need to know to boost your delivery business and so much more. But before I get into my guest interview today with Maia Tekle with Science on Call, it's time for our quick bites once again. So, Adam, what's been sizzling in your kitchen?
Oh, thanks, Bernadette. Well, I recently had the chance to talk to one of the execs at Wings, etc., about how he handled his projected sales surge during the Super Bowl.
Mhm.
It's no secret that wings are insanely popular overall, but especially on that day. And here's a statistic that blew my mind. The National Chicken Council actually estimated that Americans ate 1.5 billion wings just on that one day. One and
Wow.
a half billion. That's quite insane. And Wings, etc. I mean, they're not Wingstop, they're not one of the market leaders, but we all know Wings is red hot just in general right now, and they are benefiting from that as much as anyone. They projected their sales would go up 77% on that day, with a lot of those coming from delivery and pickup and things like that. So I asked him the obvious question, how do you prepare for something like that? That's quite a one day surge. Is that manageable? And he gave me a few of his tips. One of them was on technology. They've invested in a sophisticated online ordering system and POS platform, and just to absorb all that activity, and they could keep their staff doing the air traffic control stuff. And he also mentioned the importance of pre-orders. They really deployed their marketing for weeks leading up to the big game on trying to capture those pre-orders, so they just have them in the system and they can make adjustments. And I thought that was a really good insight, and it starts early for them. And finally, they did staff up. There's sometimes no substitute for when you have a one-day occasion that's different than the other 364 days, that you do make adjustments, and they did. So they definitely brought in more people. As far as a takeaway, I mean, you can't overlook just good old-fashioned preparation. I mean, he talked about weeks in advance, looking at what they did last year and some comparable numbers and just what they might need this year. And you want to capture those profits if you have a big day like that. And there are others like March Madness games, the Oscars. There's for different brands, they have bigger one day occasions where they can really go to town, but you don't want to do it on the back of your staff sprinting in horror after the stressful days they have, and you don't want that. I think Wings, etc. is a good example of a brand that thought ahead and really leaned on technology and kept their head and made some profits. So it was a great discussion. It was fascinating to learn about how brands interact with Super Bowl Sunday. It's a big day, so that was a fun one for me. Back to you,
Yeah,
Bernadette.
thank you for diving into that. Yeah, certainly Super Bowl is the Super Bowl for restaurants in a way. It's interesting to highlight a brand that did so well. Speaking about the technology side of things, my quick bite is about Yum Brands has launched a proprietary software as a service AI-driven product called Byte. And why that's interesting in our world is we follow, and this ties into the ongoing build versus buy debate or build or buy debate with tech stacks that we see in the restaurant world, where basically brands are deciding whether to create their own tech solutions in-house or outsource it to other vendors. But the reality is many are a hybrid model where they maybe do some in-house, and then of course they partner with outside vendors for other solutions. But Yum has now created Byte, which essentially is helping its brands like Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut streamline their operations by consolidating all these tech solutions into a one-stop shop management platform. So that includes your online and mobile ordering, your payment systems, your tools to improve kitchen and delivery operations, and ways to manage inventory and labor. And a lot of times for restaurants, those might be coming from separate vendors. And them launching this bite is certainly interesting, tying to this trend we're seeing when it comes to this build versus buy debate. And so Yum's a good example of this. Over the years, they've been picking up tech capabilities, and now they are going to be retiring their old names, such as Poseidon by Yum, Commerce Platform, Tract, and Super App, all into under Byte right now. And so I just want to highlight this. We had a really all-star panel at the Food on Demand conference last year, hosted by Juan George, where he discussed this build or buy, where he had some brands on stage who discussed we're working with so many vendors. There was a brand up there who's like, we built our own POS system. So it's definitely something for restaurants to consider and look at when they're evaluating their tech stack as more channels are coming online and restaurants are now so omni-channel. It's important to find the best way to consolidate all these different avenues. A quote that I really liked about this from Yum Brands was, you might have dozens of different tech vendors that you're trying to coordinate with to make your restaurant work every day. By building our own tech stack and making that investment, we're giving our franchisees a much more turnkey solution. So we'll always keep you updated with what's happening in the tech world, and today's interview also discusses that. So that's my quick bite today.
Excellent. Yeah, the build versus buy decision is so important. I remember last year at Food on Demand, there's a speaker who talked about they spent years pursuing one path and millions, and then they had to abandon it. And
Yeah,
these are very important decisions, and I thought your article really addressed that. And I can't wait to hear the interview.
great. Well, thank you so much. Now it's time for our guest interview. All right, now it is time for our guest interview with Maia Tekle. She is with Science on Call. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you. I know we've met at a few of the industry trade shows, including our own Food on Demand, and really love your energy and how you communicate with operators in this space. I wanted to bring some of that insight to the pod. But before we get into Science on Call, Maia, can you tell me a bit about your background and what led you into your current role today?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like most people in, I don't know, who have been working for a while, they have a varied career. I started, my first ever job was actually at a bakery. So I did start in restaurants and I worked in restaurants in my 20s. And then I spent about 13 years in marketing and advertising. So I have a solid background there. And I made the shift to ad tech, which was my first tech job. And then leveraged that to get to land a job at Square. And I was working on the caviar team, for those that remember caviar, working with restaurants on the partnership side. And we were acquired by DoorDash, and that was a big shift. And then I took a stint, I left and started my own company in sustainability logistics. And that's actually where I met Andy and his co-founders, Louisa and Ken. And then a few years later, I had scaled my company and was looking to see what my next role could be. And I had reconnected with Andy. And I think, especially after a few years in the pandemic, there still is such a need for what we offer and the services that we provide to restaurants. Restaurants over the past few years have had to adopt an enormous amount of tech that doesn't always work well together cohesively. And I am a helper by nature. And so it felt like a really good fit.
Yeah, thank you for diving in. And it's always interesting when someone says they started actually in the restaurant industry and to see where they're at now. I also was a server for many years. It's my first job and throughout college. But as you mentioned, now it's so different, especially last few years with after the pandemic, all these restaurants are omni-channel and have so many different aspects where they have tech coming in. And we'll get all into that here soon. But to start, can you give me a brief overview of what Science on Call is? And then we'll get into more of those use cases.
It's a universal help desk. I like to tell people that we're platform agnostic and we kind of sit across everything that plugs into the wall, whether it's hardware, software, and now we're starting to really get into helping people kind of be the connective tissue between all of their systems and all of the things that employees need to do a really good job. And so everything from 86ing menu items to updating menus to Wi-Fi being down or the internet being down, issues with delivery apps, everything that kind of pertains to technology within the restaurant is something that we touch and that we support with our operators.
Yeah, and that kind of led me to my next question, which was what are some of those challenges that you guys hear? Can you tell me a bit about that and what a call into Science on Call looks like and how you guys aid those operators during those stressful moments, I'm sure, for when they're operating and things go wrong or they run out of items?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest challenge that we've seen, and this has been the case for the past few years, but it's labor. So in order to operate a restaurant and maintain sustainable margins, labor is one of those levers that operators can always pull because humans can do more in a given amount of time and prioritize tasks that are necessary. They don't have control over the things like taxes, supply chain, consumer confidence. Like those are all things that are they have no control over. So I would say that labor is the biggest challenge, and the people that are working in restaurants are being asked to do more and do more at the same time simultaneously. And so, like, for example, actually one of the most popular items that we have 86 this year is onion rings. So if a restaurant runs out of onion rings, there's a lot of different ways that the employees can go in and like hide those from and marking them out of stock. But if there are multiple, if there's a busy lunch rush and there are delivery drivers that are waiting for things and there are different priorities and maybe someone called out sick, to go back to the back office and mark all of those things out of stock actually takes a lot of time for that individual employee versus being able to just shoot us a text, shoot us a WhatsApp, and then it gets done in seconds. That's just like one small example. But again, I think when we think about what we're providing in terms of a solution, we're allowing for employees to do what they do best, and that's providing good food and hospitality to their guests. And then we're kind of like in their pocket, able to do a handful of the other repetitive tasks and the things that potentially could take them a lot of time, but taking that off their plate.
And you just mentioned how this aids operators who are already wearing so many hats and they don't have the time to run to the back office to do those things. What other areas are you seeing restaurants struggle with when it comes to tech? Are you working with brands that have many different outside vendors coming in that they have to handle? Or what are you seeing when it comes to those complications?
I would say that, investing in tech is a big challenge when it comes to like the financial investment. If you're switching from certain systems, I mean, even something like a POS system takes a long time, especially if there's a legacy system that you're switching to, say, like a newer cloud-based system. And so I would say that the financial burden, the strategy, and if your IT team is spending most of their time 86ing menu items, fixing printer issues, figuring out what's wrong with the Wi-Fi, they are not able to do any of that more strategic work. And I would say that that's actually one of the things that we are seeing is that restaurants can't evolve and advance at the rate that they want to because their existing team is bogged down by the stuff that we do day in and day out. And so I would say that that's also kind of like a benefit that we provide is that allowing their leadership to actually focus on the strategic work. But I would say that the other piece of the puzzle that we get an intimate view of is that the systems, they work fine together, but I would say the interoperability of a tech stack can be at best cohesive enough, but they don't necessarily work great together from time to time. So if there's an issue, let's say with the network, but the person behind the counter thinks it's a POS issue and they're on the phone with Toast, and then it turns out it's actually not a Toast problem, but they've wasted a few hours. For us, we own the problem. And so we're able to see across all of the things. And if we've already solved it at store 1, 2, 3 and store 4, 5, 6 calls us, we can get to the solution faster than most of the technology vendors because they only see their piece of the puzzle.
That's why I wanted to highlight you guys because I've been following the adoption of tech in restaurants. And you mentioned legacy. A lot of these legacy brands might have had the same POS system for many, many years, and now they're bringing in maybe a new online ordering vendor, and all these things are happening at once. And like you mentioned, yes, you can call into maybe a Toast, but then this could be a PAR problem, just naming
Yeah.
different companies. So do you guys see yourselves working with certain sizes often, or does this aid range from like SMBs, or is this more of issues you see with larger enterprises that might have more tech coming in?
I would say we see the same issues across any size
Sure,
partner
yeah.
because the technology is very same unless they're custom making their own stuff. But at that point, they are large enough that they've already invested in that infrastructure. So we don't necessarily need to help with that. But I would say once you hit the like 7 unit mark, all the way up to several hundred units, we're seeing a lot of the same challenges. It's just at different scales and sizes.
And if a restaurant was trying to evaluate their tech stack or evaluate where they're having issues at, what do you think are some of the key areas that they should focus on, where there's discrepancies, or what areas are you hearing that have most focus on?
One of the first questions I ask is if people have backup internet. Until you don't have it, or until you're really looking in and evaluating, when you're down, you're down. You're not making any sales. And because the tech stack relies on that internet connection, having a backup internet, and they're really affordable. A lot of times your existing provider has that kind of as an option. We also provide it, but it's something that I always ask. I always ask if they're leveraging cloud POS or are they dependent on a more expensive Windows server on the office that will ultimately fail and prevent them from making sales. How quickly is their internal team able to respond to requests? I would say that that's actually one of the things that immediately we provide value in overnight. IT teams don't typically work 24/7, but we offer that. And so even off the bat, some of our partners come to us just for nights and weekends coverage because restaurants operate 24 hours a day sometimes. So like when there's an overnight delay, but there's a big tech issue that has happened, that is loss in sales, that's loss in revenue. I would say that one of the other big questions I like to ask is if their internal IT resources and stakeholders have bandwidth to focus on bigger initiatives, things like evolving their tech stack. And there's usually this technology wish list that gets punted because they don't have time, because their inboxes are full of things like our printer is down, or we have these price changes that we need to make, or like right now we're getting a ton of questions about password resets for their W-2s. This is like the most popular request right now, is any of their like HR portals is getting like password requests, but that typically falls on the IT leadership team, and that just bogs down their productivity in the day to day. So those are the questions I like to ask.
No, I love that. And I think that'd be helpful for anyone listening when they're trying to, where can we improve and what questions should we be asking? You mentioned, yeah, I'm sure right now is a busy time with tax season coming up and so forth. So good thing they have you guys. Food on demand, we focus a lot on delivery and things with off-premises side of operations. I saw on your website that Science on Call can also help with, hey, let's turn off our online ordering right now, like with a DoorDash, if they can't handle it in store. Can you tell me about that and why that's important to have for restaurants if they're juggling and they can't fulfill all the in-store and outer at the same time?
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of factors that are at play when the delivery apps get throttled.
Right.
Usually it's a staffing or they're too busy to handle it. What I think is the biggest kind of aha moment that I've had at Science on Call is that a lot of times when that gets throttled, some forget to turn it back on until sometimes, depending on who's in charge of seeing that, they can go weeks without that getting turned back on. Not our customers, but in general, that's like depending on who's watching that at an individual location, it could be just something that gets forgotten. So it's one of those things, again, that we receive a WhatsApp, a text, a call, hey, like turn this on. And then we'll reach back out and say, like, let us know when you want us to turn it off. And then let us know when you want us to turn it back on.
Yeah.
And so I would say that that's a piece. And again, that's revenue that operators should be thoughtful about, recognizing that, again, when it's a busy time and it gets throttled off, that of course there's going to be a time where you can turn it back on and there are going to be customers that do want to order. And so it's again a piece of the puzzle that if you're not looking at it, if it's not a priority, it gets forgotten. But that's something that we are always kind of on top of.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said, not your clients, but sometimes people can forget for almost a week or more. And that's crazy to think about. But when you have so many locations, for example, that can be missed sometimes by even the higher up wouldn't notice that that store was down with their online ordering or with like through a DoorDash. And yeah, that's missed revenue, of course, especially for those people who are married to their apps and they, might go through that channel mainly.
I was also going to say, like, especially if there are multiple locations in a given area, there are people that love your restaurant and they are going to maybe order from a little bit further away, but that comes at an inconvenience. Maybe they have to pay an additional delivery fee. Maybe they have to tip their driver a little bit more because they're traveling a little bit further, but because their normal place has been throttled off. It's a small, tiny example, but when you magnify it across 50, 100, 200 locations, that actually adds up. And again, when operators are constantly trying to figure out how to win and retain consumer dollars, it's one that we've found that it keeps both all people happy and having an additional kind of layer that's paying attention.
Right. Yeah, having the second eyes watching is really important, I think. Anything I haven't mentioned with Science on Call or anything you guys are working on that you'd like to mention or excited for?
I would say that one of the most exciting things that we're working on, we have so how our system is built. It's built on this level of like when we fix a problem once, we never have to fix it again, in the sense that like it all gets documented and then kind of put into our engine where our team members that are all US based kind of like reference them. So when someone calls us, we know the location, we know their tech stack, we know if we've solved the problem before in another location, we can always go to that solution. And I think what we've invested in now in more automation is allowing a lot of multi-unit operators who don't have innovation budget to leverage things like AI and advancements. Truly, their team, their guests can benefit from. We're democratizing that so that even a 7-unit chain can have access to things like efficiencies, rapid responses, instant knowledge retrieval, kind of seamless execution. And I would say it's been really exciting to see how, yeah, small unit operators all the way up to large operators who don't have that innovation budget to invest in things like that. We're providing kind of access to a system that connects all of their already existing dots. We're starting to also provide kind of absorb individual SOPs, employee resources, training things. So not replacing any of those vendors, but basically making it so that the same way that they text us a question or like, hey, the Wi-Fi is broken, hey, the printer's down, hey, what's our PTO policy? Or the coffee grinder is making a weird sound. And us being able, because their SOPs are all updated and have a lot of documentation, but those live somewhere. They're usually at best on the cloud or in a training manual, but some people are still using binders in their back office. And so
Right.
having it at their fingertips allows for employees to feel less like they have to memorize so many things and have access to the responses that they need within seconds versus having to wait.
That's where we're seeing the industry move when it comes to having those answers answered quickly, whether that's through a company like yours or some are using like AI chatbots to get that information right away. No one wants to go through a binder anymore or a thick binder for employee training as well, as you mentioned. I just talked to an operator who had invested in having their training on an app and make it more like a TikTok thing for their Gen Z employees because no one wants to flip through a handbook anymore and it's not the best way to learn anymore.
We're big fans of partners like Opus.
And that's who it is. That's who the operator, I think it was Big Chicken mentioned they're using Opus for that.
Yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
love the work that they're doing. But again, Opus lives in its own little bubble. So if you have this, hey, what was that? What was that training video on how to make this particular smoothie? And we're like, we
Right.
can connect those dots for them.
There you go. Yeah. So it's all works together. That's fantastic. So moving a bit on from Science on Call and just picking your brain a bit since you are in tech, where do you see the restaurant tech industry heading? You mentioned AI already. Any other tech trends you're keeping an eye on? Are you bullish on robotics? What do you see?
I would say, yeah, especially my few years in logistics, I'm excited about the robotics and the automation in that way in supply chain. I think that we are going to hopefully get better when it comes to our efficiency,
Mm.
when it comes to how we deliver goods and services. I would say I also feel like there's probably going to be some sort of consolidation with technology across the restaurant tech industry. I know operators would love to work with fewer partners that are doing more, and I've started to see that more and more service providers are providing a wider breadth of services for operators because the tech stack in restaurants has gotten so enormously complex that it almost is like we've overcorrected from
Right.
low tech industry.
Sure.
And there are other industries we can look toward that have brick and mortar. Retail is a great example that has more streamlined technology. Obviously, they have a lot of issues to work out too, but I would say that I'm starting to see more of that demand.
Right. Yeah. Consolidation is what I hear as well.
Yeah.
Awesome, Maya. So thank you so much for diving all into Science on Call and your role and what you guys do for the restaurant industry. I'd like to move on to the end where I just like to ask a few fun questions. Did you leave room for dessert is what I call it, just to get to know you better outside of
Sure.
your role. So I know last time we chatted, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you had moved to a small town. I'm not sure if you're still there or not, but can you kind of tell me a bit about that and that leap you made?
I did. I moved to a small town, fewer than 1,000 residents.
Mhm.
We have 13 restaurants in town, so the ratio, if you do the
Yeah.
math, is like pretty enormous. But it's
Yeah.
because we have actually a huge amount of tourism
Right.
in our town. I made the move from Oakland to this small town. It feels a little bit like a Hallmark movie in the
Yeah.
best ways. I know all of my neighbors and they drop things like soup off to me when we're sick. And I made the move for my fiance who's taking over an art supply business.
Right.
It's been a dream, but it also is wild to see that juxtaposition of big city to small town and how even like my knowledge in restaurant tech can and have influence in this type of a town. They're pretty much all 100% using either Square or Toast. Or I would say some of them are pretty still low tech, but it's been interesting to kind of like take a peek at how like a single unit operators work in a small
Right.
town.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a new perspective that you've gained. And I'm also from a very small town, not smaller than that, and it did not have a bunch of fun restaurants or was a tourist area. But I do remember the charm of knowing my neighbors, and every time I do visit, they're knocking on my door and
Yeah.
just all the time. So I love it. So tell me a bit about what you like to do for fun, Maya. Any hobbies or things that we can find you doing on the weekend, maybe?
Oh yeah. Well, we hike up here a lot. I would say it's going to start soon. Swimming, I swim outside once the weather is nice. And I used to swim when I was in high school, and now I've picked it back up since moving up here. So we're big outdoors people in general. I love to dance. I've started to line dance, and we found a
Ooh,
cool line dancing spot here.
fun.
Um, and I love to craft. So whether it be crochet or doing just like arts and crafts and collage. I'm like looking around. My office is kind of filled with all sorts of crafts.
I love it. I love it. Okay, my last question for you is where do you like to travel or where's one of your favorite places you've been?
Yeah, a trip I want to redo is I spent a semester in Costa Rica studying
Ooh,
sustainable farming, and I've wanted to go back and my partner and I are planning a trip there. But I would say anywhere that has a beach that we can surf is great. We did a trip last year to Europe, which was really awesome. I have family there, and we just also did a road trip this past weekend down to Northern California. So like whether it be in the car or on a plane, we love getting out and visiting cool places.
Well, those sound amazing, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that when I see you next at the next conference. That's all the time we have for today, Maia, but thank you so much. If anyone has any more they'd like to learn from Science on Call or so forth, I'm sure you can reach out to Maia here or find us through Food on Demand, and we'll direct you. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next conference.
Likewise.